Hi, this is Doug from Dynamic Computing, and welcome to episode 41 of 10-Minute Amiga Retrocast, where I interview Matthew Arnold Stern and his new book, Amiga. Today I'm changing up the format just a little bit. I'm going to be reviewing his book and also having an interview with the author. It certainly is Amiga related though, as the title of the book is Amiga, as you can see. Matthew Arnold Stern is an author whose credentials go back to the 80s. He wrote quite a few technical manuals and also wrote in some very popular magazine articles, which he'll mention in the interview. His new novel is titled Amiga, and in many ways the Amiga 1000 is a central character in the novel. And no, the Amiga is not using the say command to actually talk to anybody in the book, although that would be kind of cool. The main protagonist in the novel is Laura Rodriguez, who is a young 20-something-year-old woman in the 1980s who's very tech-savvy and is an expert programmer. And it goes through some of her interactions in trying to find a job in her field in the 80s as a woman. Through a series of interactions and interviews, she ends up working for a very eccentric family who is using an almost unheard of computer called the Amiga, which she'd never heard of before, to create some really clever software. We follow her adventures through 1985 and 1986, and in the middle of the book, while you're reading it, it jumps forward in time to 2016 and her current life, and how her current life is going and the interactions with her current life. It does a great job of jumping back and forth between 1985 and 2016 and explaining how those two timelines fit nicely together and involve the Amiga while doing so. The characters are very, very well written and very well fleshed out. And this is not a story about a computer. This is a story about a young lady and her life challenges and how this incredible machine influenced her life. And in some cases brought people together, and in some cases tore people apart. Now that you know a little bit about the book, let's get on with my interview with the author, Matthew Arnold Stern. Take it away. Hello, everybody. As I mentioned in my introduction, I'm going to be interviewing Matthew today, Matthew Arnold Stern, who is the author of a brand new book, Amiga, that's going to be coming out just a few weeks, right, Matthew?
That's right. It'll be out to the general public on November 27th, and you can buy it wherever you buy books and ebooks.
Oh, that's absolutely wonderful. So this book, obviously, titled Amiga with a nice Boeing ball on the cover there, has a lot to do with our beloved Amiga. And the Amiga 1000, as a matter of fact, is one of the starring characters in the book. Tell us a little bit about your history with the Amiga and why you thought that would make an interesting addition to the book.
Well, I've been wanting to write about the early days of the computer industry for a long time. And I've started in the industry in 1983. I was working for a small Commodore 64 software company called Entech, and started off doing press releases, but then I wound up doing anything that had to do with writing, which is how I got into technical writing as a career. And so it's something that I wanted to write about. And I had several false starts with it. Stories weren't coming together. And then in 2016, a lot of things were going on in my life. And there was a thing that comes up every year for writers called National Novel Writer or Writing Month, or NaNoWriMo. And I decided, okay, I'm going to dust off my Amiga ideas and make that the basis of the story. And what was special about the Amiga, out of all of the vintage computers that were out at that time, was that it was the one that was truly different, that it was unique, and it had capabilities that were far beyond what other computers could do at that time. And it was the one where we really wanted it to succeed. So there's sort of a bit of a romance with the Amiga, and it's something that out of all the computers I used in that era, that was the one that most stuck with me.
That's absolutely true, and I feel exactly the same way. Out of all the machines I've owned over the decades, the one that has stuck in my mind as having a personality is the Amiga.
Yes.
You know, love my Commodore 64, love my VIC-20. My PCs have served me well and made me money over the last 25 years. Yeah. But something about the Amiga and is just it has a personality, which kind of leads me into my next question. To me, when I read your book, the Amiga almost came across as almost a character in the book in its own right. Was that intentional? Did you kind of have that feeling too, that the Amiga was an actual character in the book?
Yes, I did. And it was interesting as the story unfolded about how big of a role that it would play in terms of how the characters reacted to it and how it drove a lot of the decisions that the characters made. Mm-hmm. And it also became important for what it represented to the characters and what it meant to them and what lessons they learned from the experiences they had. So yeah, the Amiga definitely came out as a character in that book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely felt that. And yep. Now the main protagonist of the book, and I don't want to reveal too much of the plot of the book. I want people to read it. Was she based off anyone in real life? Did you get the influences for her incredible story off of anyone in real life?
Well, she came from bits and pieces of lots of different people that I've worked with at various companies, people mm-hmm. that I knew, and also even people that I work with today and some of the challenges that they face in terms of making a name for themselves in the computer industry. Mm-hmm. So she came from a lot of different people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's great. Boy, the book, it just does an incredible job of jumping back and forth from the mid 80s to the relatively current day, 2016. And that's sometimes hard to pull off, and that's not always easy to pull off. Did you find it particularly challenging to write from that perspective? Because your characters have different thoughts and feelings and emotions over the 25, 30 years. Was it particularly difficult?
Well, what I looked for in the story is looking for things that happened in that character's past that play a role in what happens in 30 years later. Mm-hmm. So in a way, it was a really fun structure to work with because I could put some clues in some of the 2016 sections that that play out in the 1985-1986 section. Mm-hmm. So it was a fun, different challenge, and it was also ties into how we see ourselves differently in different periods of time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I also loved when you'd get to the end of a particular part of the story, you'd have the break listed there, like a computer generated break. I thought that was a very clever way to, end a paragraph or end a particular part of the story. I really appreciated that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Our book designer did that. And when I saw it, it was just such a beautiful idea. I really mm-hmm. liked what he did with the book.
Yeah, that was very clever. A lot of the book is centered on the difficulties of intelligent and motivated women in the 80s and the problems that they faced, and also the challenges that they face nowadays. You think we're making some progress in that area there? I mean, you can see the progress that was made in her life, but do you feel like we're making good progress with women and their exposure to the workplace?
Well, I know that the place where I work at does a great job in terms of diversity and having a good, well-balanced workforce. And
Hmm.
we have women in all different engineering departments. We also have women in upper management positions. So I do see the progress there. And I know that one of the biggest things because I have a granddaughter,
Hmm.
and one of the things that I get concerned about is how girls are often discouraged from pursuing technology and mathematics and science careers.
Hmm.
And it's not that they definitely have shown the aptitude and the desire to do that, but they get lots of signals throughout their education, throughout their through in society in general, that no, this is boy stuff. You shouldn't be doing that, and we have to learn to stop that type of stuff, to encourage them that, hey, if this is what you want to do, to
Hmm.
pursue it. And when you see movies and books where you see women who succeed in technological fields, when we see examples in real life,
Hmm.
that's inspiring. There was a news report today about a Delta flight and don't know if I'm remembering this correctly, but the entire crew, were all women, and they flew a group of girls to go to a NASA center.
Hmm.
So, that's the types of things that we have to have more role models, both
Hmm.
entertainment
Absolutely.
and in the workings world.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I appreciate you bringing the topic up in your book because it's a very important
Yeah.
topic, being that I have two daughters.
Yes.
They need to know that there's opportunities for them with whatever they want to do. So that's appreciated.
Yes.
Back to the topic of the book a little bit. Um, the software that they were working on in the book was fascinating. It was fun to read about the progress they made on the software. And the whole time, what came into my mind was DigiView from NewTek. Was that an inspiration for the product that they were creating, or was it loosely based on something else?
Well, what I wanted to have them do, and I won't go into too much with the
Right.
plot, but because it's all tied together,
Mm-hmm.
but I was thinking about the modern smartphones and how we depend on our photo apps.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, what if something like that the people started using it 30 years ago? And the
Mm-hmm.
Amiga, and actually even the 8-bit machines, had that capability with
Sure.
digital eyes, and the micron camera that I mentioned in the book.
Mm-hmm.
I actually found one of the old manuals and downloaded it, and that was part of the research into the story.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be nice to be able to take an app that people use every day in the 21st century and see how can people create something like that using the technology of the 80s. So that was
Mm-hmm.
where that came from.
So that micron camera was a real thing. That
Yes.
Wow, that's really cool. I'm gonna have to look that up. That sounds really interesting. Yeah, that was fascinating. Um, Now, we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but the Amiga computer, it did leave a lasting impression on so many of us over the years, back in the 80s and 90s. Why do you think that it left such a lasting impression, and why do you think there's such a resurgence of interest in the Amiga computer and the Amiga community now? Do you have any insight on that?
Yes, I think there's a couple of things. First of all, with the Amiga, about why it made such a lasting impression, is the Amiga could do things that no other computer could do at the time. That the Amiga was able to do multitasking, it did desktop video, and had amazing music and games. So it was able to do things that it would take years for PCs and Macs to catch up and do. So, and I think that the one thing, there's a scene in the book where the protagonist talks about how computers today we look at them as tools, and she even referenced the book Soul of the New. Our let's see, Tracy Kidder spoke about the soul of a new machine, but our new machines have no soul. And then she reflected about the Amiga and about how when she was using it, everything felt possible. That each click, each program that you open is a new experience. It's like, and you get the feeling of, wow, I didn't know a computer could do that. And I do find that people are interested in the Amiga today for a lot of different reasons. First, to recapture that past that we had, and also to try to understand, okay, where did the technology that we enjoy today, where did it come from? And there's that aspect. And I also, when I watch people modify and rebuild their old computers, it's sort of like what people do with vintage cars. Like you go out to the burger place on a Wednesday night, and people have their classic cars all out in display, and they've spent hours rebuilding and upgrading and machining parts that no longer exist. So it's an enjoyable hobby in and of itself, and plus you get to enjoy a part of your childhood or your youth.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I was watching a video the other day. I don't know if you've heard of Clint from Lazy Game Reviews. He's a very, very popular YouTuber on retro equipment. And he did a video on an Apple computer from 1996, a PowerPC Apple computer that had a built-in 486 inside of it so it could run DOS software along with the Apple software.
I think I saw that one. I didn't watch the video, but I saw a reference to that.
Yeah. And he's talking about it being a 1996 machine and how fascinating it was. And all I could think of was, my Amiga could do that in 1989. You could get a bridge board, put it in your Amiga, 6 or 7 years earlier, not only run the Amiga, but run the PC and run the Mac software with the software program called Shapeshifter. We could do that 6 or 7 years before. So it really is amazing just what kind of influences the Amiga had on the rest of the tech world that it's never given credit for. They come out and they say, oh, hey, look what we did. We're awesome. Yeah, we did that 5 years ago is what I used to think.
Yeah, that was the whole thing about the Amiga, was that PC and Mac took a long time to catch up to where the Amiga was back in the 80s. And like, for example, I was reading about Copeland, Apple, this was like mid-90s, Apple's attempt to redesign the Macintosh operating system before they came out with OS X. And one of the things that they were trying to do was preemptive multitasking, which the Amiga did back in 1985. And that tripped them up on Copeland. They couldn't do it with the Mac as it was back then. So that's how advanced the Amiga was for its time.
Maybe if they just took an Amiga 500 motherboard and put it inside the Mac, then they could multitask.
Yeah, they sure could, yeah.
Yeah, that's funny. So you and I chatted about this a little while ago, but you've been an author for many years, and I understand you've also written some articles for some popular computer magazines back in the day. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. I wrote for Run magazine. I also did a review for Amiga World, and I wrote for several other ones, Family Computing. I also did some articles for ST Log for the Atari ST. So I did
never
a lot
heard of it.
That. Nah, never heard
Atari
of it.
ST, never heard of it.
That was a big rivalry back then. I remember when it was really hot, and I worked for a company that they were trying to be the first ST software company. And so I did use the ST, and I had some one coworker I mentioned in one of my blog entries who was a big evangelist. And the ST, and I may lose some readers for this, but They did do a few things that were smart, like the MIDI ports
Yeah.
that they put in, because and that there were people I knew who started off in music on the Commodore 64 and they went to the ST
Mm-hmm.
because of the MIDI ports. And then the other thing that was smart was they made their floppy drives DOS readable.
Mm-hmm.
So in theory, you could be working on a WordPerfect document at work on your PC, take it home and finish it on your Atari ST. In theory, even
Yeah.
today, it's very difficult to do work cross-platform. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just between you and me, don't tell any of my followers, but the Atari ST really wasn't that bad a machine, and I actually do kind of like them. Just don't tell anybody.
yeah.
How
But
about?
the thing about I'm sorry, but
Good.
one other thing about the Atari ST before we go on, the thing about it was it really wasn't that special as a computer,
Mm-hmm.
and that may have been for me the big difference between the ST and the Amiga is the ST was a basic 68,000 graphic computer. It its performance is sort of negligible, but the Amiga was doing stuff that no other computer was doing at the time. And that's why I would want to write a book about the Amiga and not so much about the Atari ST.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, and also the word Amiga fits so nicely, has a double meaning with the protagonist in the book and the computer. It
Yes.
has a nice little double meaning there. And,
Yes.
calling her an Atari ST just wouldn't have sounded the same. So
No, it wasn't.
that's too funny. So I understand you're going to be at some, not necessarily book signings, but some events coming up in the near future related to your book.
Yes, I'm going to be at this event called Indie Author Day, which is going to be tomorrow at the Anaheim Central Library.
So that'll be Saturday.
Yeah,
Saturday, October 12th, right? Mm-hmm.
Yes. And what that is, it's a gathering of local authors in Orange County. They also have this in other communities and in other with other libraries. And what's good about that is it gives us an opportunity as local authors to promote our books. We do sales and we do book signings. We also are going to have some readings from different authors, and I'm going to be moderating a panel with 4 other local authors. So
excellent. That's fascinating. Any other events coming up before the release of the book that we can expect to see you at? Anything planned?
Well, I'm also setting up some other YouTube interviews with there's one that interviews authors. That interview is going to be coming up. I'm also arranging some book signings in the area.
Excellent.
There's a local Barnes and Noble that has carried my book, so they've already said, yeah, when we get Amiga in, we'll have books for you to sign. So I'm looking forward to that. And I've also been talking to some other local bookstores. And if you go to MatthewArnoldStern.com, which is my website, I will post information about upcoming events and interviews and other Amiga news.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. So many bookstores will carry this. I suppose it's going to be available on, what is that big company? Amazon or something like that? They'll probably have it too.
Something like that. Yes.
Yeah.
It'll also be available at BarnesandNoble.com for Kobo if you use the Kobo reader. So it'll be both in paperback and ebook.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's fantastic. Wow, that's absolutely amazing. Did you have anything else you wanted to say, either about the book or anything that I possibly missed that you think your future readers might be interested in?
Well, one of the things that when I mentioned about my website, MatthewArnoldStern.com, I've been posting various articles, and you actually, I think, retweeted one of them, which is one about I've been writing about my journey in writing this book and getting it published. And one of the things that I found. I actually found that when I dug up this hardware maintenance manual that I showed you earlier, that I found the first thing that I ever wrote on an Amiga, and I transcribed that and I posted it on my website so you could see what my first impressions were the Amiga. And there's even some comparisons between how I felt about the ST at the time and how I felt about the Amiga. So
yeah, I really liked reading that. I enjoyed reading that blog. So
thank you.
It was very good. Well, that's just incredible. Matthew, I'd like to thank you very much for coming on the show today. I do appreciate it. And I'll have my review and my thoughts about the book in the next part of the episode here. But thank you very much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Well, certainly. Thank you very much for having me.
Great. Thanks. Thank you so much, Matthew, for agreeing to this interview. It was really a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. So how would I rate this book, Amiga? Well, I would give it 5 out of 5 Amiga check marks with no hesitation at all. I really enjoyed it. As a matter of fact, I was so engrossed with it, when I sat down to read it, it's 240 pages long, so it's not terribly long. When I sat down to read it, sat down, read it, cover to cover, non-stop. It was that good. It took me a couple of hours. I highly recommend picking it up from your favorite bookseller on November 27th when it is released. Please check out Matthew's website at www.matthewarnoldstern.com. He's got some great blogs on there, great information about the book. And please like the video and subscribe to my channel. I do new videos just about every week, usually about Amigas, oftentimes about our 8-bit computers too. But until next time, this is Doug from 10 Minute Amiga Book Review, signing out.